Buenas tardes, Los Angeles. Larry Elder here, the sage from South Central, the Prince of Pico Union, the czar of common sense. Welcome to our program. No Victocrats allowed because we got a country to save. Let's get it teed up.
You want to play rough? Say hello to my little friend.
Screening your calls, Mr. Dan Finder.
Because if it's a mistake, maybe we could do something about it. Find a cure. Invent a vaccine. Build up our immune systems.
News, Gary Garrison.
You gotta tell them, Silent Breed is people!
My engineer, Steve Paylett.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
And producing the show, Audrey Antley.
You're the leg in the thigh and the dog meat of God's great chicken.
And welcome to the show. The number is 1-800-222-5222. We're going to break with normal format because we have a guest, because of his time constraints, could only talk to us at this time during the show. And please welcome back to the show Robert Zimmerman, the brother of George Zimmerman, the man accused of, quote, murdering, close quote, Trayvon Martin. Robert, as always, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me back, Larry.
Robert, I hear that you're in town to do the Bill Maher show.
Right.
Well, good luck with that.
Thanks.
As I was mentioning to you, Bill Maher has not invited me on anything he's done in almost 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And the reason is he came on my show, and he was doing damage control for some comment that he made when he was doing politically incorrect. Not important what that was.
Right.
And I jumped on him for calling himself the libertarian, which is what he used to do at the time. And I said, Bill, the only thing you're libertarian on is drugs. You support race-based preferences. You support minimum wage. You want universal health coverage, for crying out loud. You even supported Ralph Nader. The average libertarian I know would rather support Rasputin than Ralph Nader. You're not a libertarian. He was pissed. And he said, I don't want to have this discussion, and we've not had a discussion since then. That's just me, though. But what was his position regarding your brother? I'm assuming he jumped on him and called him a bigot and a racist, like most people on the left did.
Most people at the time were doing it, and there was particularly circulating at the time a lot of there was much ado made about this word coon, whether or not it was used, and it was being made to continue again that mythology that George was a racist and he had committed murder. And there were fair questions, like I've said before, at the time about the city of Sanford and their past as it related to race and access to justice. But using that word, inventing that sort of narrative went a little bit too far because, racists don't hesitate to use the N-word or other words when they're confronted with someone they don't like, a black person. They're racist and they say awful, deplorable racist things, but they kind of made up a word that hadn't been used in 50 years to keep adding that fuel to the fire that people needed to believe to keep the ratings coming.
1-800-222-5222 is our number. We're talking to Robert Zimmerman, the brother of George Zimmerman. Robert, let's take this from the top. Your brother's version of what happened that night is what?
Without getting into too many evidentiary details, what is most important about what happened that night is that when he was forced to use his firearm to defend himself, in his mind and under law, he felt it was a justified use. I mean, we're talking about split-second decisions you have to make. What is important when you carry a firearm is not just when you use it, but that you don't lose it. And what forced his hand was the threat by Mr. Martin that you're going to die tonight, and then Mr. Martin moving to disarm him. You can't afford to be wrong about what's going to happen. So, there's questions about, and they're fair questions about where was he standing, where was Trayvon, did Trayvon come back to attack him, was Trayvon hiding when he attacked him? Mm-hmm. Long story short, George was ambushed in some way, surprised attack, his nose was broken, he was having his head pounded on the concrete by someone sitting on him, someone trying to suppress his cries for help using his hands. And George ended up doing what he had to do to save his life in the moment he was being disarmed. I don't know that I could have shown, to be perfectly honest, the same amount of restraint that George did. George has been carrying a concealed weapon. I never have had that permit, so I don't have that luxury to know what that might be like if I were in that situation. But that's what happened that night.
I'm talking to Robert Zimmerman, the brother of George Zimmerman. Robert, was your brother polygraphed?
He had the new kind of polygraph, which is called voice stress analysis, and there was a battery of those.
Was that administered by the Sanford Police Department, or did he have an outside polygraph expert do that?
No, it's my understanding when he was being investigated that it was the Sanford Police Department, or it may be the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's equipment, or a technician, but the police did do that to him right away.
And I heard whatever test it was, he passed.
He passed repeatedly, yes, with no sign of deception at all.
Robert, let's change subject a little bit. I'm sure you were following the cop killer Christopher Dorner, and I'm sure you heard that in his manifesto he referred to your brother,
right?
In very harsh terms. Quote: "If you continuously followed me while I was walking at dusk night, I would confront you as well. Too bad Trayvon didn't smash your skull completely open, Zim. While Trayvon's body erodes to bone 6 feet under, Zimmerman has put no less than 40 pounds while on bail. Zimmerman was arrested for battery on a peace officer and avoided jail prison because he completed a diversion program. That's a history of being an a-hole," except he didn't say a-hole. What was your reaction when you heard about this?
We were a little bit alarmed, to be honest. I mean, this is a person who was described as armed and dangerous and expert in killing people, trained by the Navy to do so. So clearly when somebody mentions a family member like that, you have to kind of take a step back and think, is this some kind of hit list? What is he talking about? I think that obviously he's a deranged individual, or was, if he went about executing his revenge in this way. I mean, that's not the right way to go about changing things. I think some of the things he said about George, unfortunately, they may not all be his fault that he believed them. The finger of blame here really points directly at the media, and the reason it does is because they used parties that had a financial interest in the outcome of this case as sources for what they reported to be truth.
Give me an example of what you mean.
An example, for example, Natalie Jackson, Benjamin Crump, Ryan Jewison, the original scheme team, these people getting together and originating and driving the narrative, which started with 3 words, white, black, and gated community, into gun-toting, vigilante, self-appointed neighborhood watch captain, child murderer, George Zimmerman. They were responsible for the inception. They sort of loaded the gun, so to speak, and the media fired it.
Have you been struck by how many times your brother's race has changed?
Yes, I have. I wish the same standard would apply to everybody, but apparently
he started out as a white person, then a white Jew, I think, and then
there was speculation, then perhaps a white Mexican, then it became white Hispanic, and now he's largely Hispanic. Now, most of the time people use that word now.
So when your brother's ethnicity was changing, by definition, I guess yours was as well.
All of ours, yes.
Were you surprised, Robert Zimmerman, at the amount of sympathy Christopher Dorner got versus the relative lack of sympathy that your brother got from probably the same people? I'm
shocked because these are the same people who are clamoring, for gun control and take away our guns. Mm-hmm. And had he used an AR-15, I don't know what weapons Christopher Dorner used exactly in every circumstance. They would have been all over AR-15s, but then he's described by a Columbia University professor as kind of exciting, like watching Django Unchained, and I think that's an outrageous comment. I don't think it's exciting to murder people in cold blood innocently, if that's what in fact happened here.
And the comment that you're referring to was made by Mark Lamont Hill. He is a Columbia University professor. He was on CNN, and here's what happened.
I have a really, really hard time with people saying that this man is a hero after the people he killed, all the manpower, hours that have been wasted, not to mention the airwaves that have been wasted by this chase. I'm in shock.
Who disagrees with Lauren?
Nothing's waste. There's no waste here, though. I mean, this has been an important public conversation that we've had about police brutality, about police corruption, about state violence. I mean, there were even talks about making him the first domestic drone target. I mean, this is serious business here. I don't think it's been a waste of time at all. And as far as Dorner himself goes, he's been like a real-life superhero to many people. Now, don't get me wrong. What he did was awful. Killing innocent people is bad. But when you read his manifesto, when you read the message that he left, he wasn't entirely crazy. He had a plan and a mission here. And many people aren't rooting for him to kill innocent people. They're rooting for somebody who was wronged to get a kind of revenge against the system. It's almost like watching Django Unchained in real life. It's kind of exciting.
And Robert, I only could imagine what Mark Lamont Hill probably said about Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman at the time.
Right.
I'm sure he sided with Trayvon Martin and argued that your brother was a racist. And here he is basically saying that this man that was out killing cops was exciting.
Was like a real live
Django.
Superhero.
Yeah,
that's really, really disturbing. I think that people who hear that, young people who hear that, everybody's not a university professor trying to make these kind of larger points, but it can kind of mislead them. Copycat crimes happen all the time, and I don't think that because you have a manifesto and then exact revenge that makes it any more heroic than if you had just gone and killed somebody.
My guest is Robert Zimmerman. The number is 1-800-222-5222. He is the brother of George Zimmerman. Robert, how close are you to your brother?
Very close. If George if it were me in his situation, he would be doing exactly the same thing.
Let's talk about what happens next. There was a denial of a request to delay the stand your ground hearing. Why did your lawyers or your brother's lawyers want the time?
You know, they enumerated very clear premises. Even the judge, when she originally denied postponing the trial to November, said, you know, there are challenges, but they are surmountable. And I think that those challenges are real, and you can't wish them away or pretend they weren't there. I think that it was telling to me as an outsider, and I'm not an attorney, that in that same hearing, when data was handed over to the defense from the state, it was incomplete. It didn't have a chain of custody log accompanying it. And then the judge had to intervene, ask for the state to provide that as well. And so what one takes from that is there would not be complete discovery but for the intervention of the court. And that's kind of been the story, you know, stammering about images you don't have, and then voila, here comes this color picture, or evidence that doesn't exist, or we're going to turn over the evidence, and the latest one is turning over blank CDs of surveillance footage. It's disturbing because in America, the defendant has rights. The judge, the jury, the state, the bailiff, everybody else, they have responsibilities. But our criminal justice system cloaks the defendant with rights, and they are entitled to have the information that the state is presenting against them when they allege they've committed a crime.
The number, again, is 1-800-222-5222. My guest is Robert Zimmerman, the brother of George Zimmerman. The trial is scheduled for June of this year?
Yes, presumably, yes.
6 persons in the jury?
In the state of Florida, yes, unless it's a capital.
And they're going to impanel something like 500 people to get 6.
That's
and
the standing
couple of alternatives.
Right. That's the standing order now, and it appears that that's going to be over 3 days. You know that's going to. So it's not 500 people are going to pour into the courthouse at a time, but yes.
Robert, do you have time to stick around for a few calls?
I do.
Okay, 1-800-222-5222. If you'd like to ask Robert Zimmerman a question, he is the brother of George Zimmerman. He is in town to do the Bill Maher show on Real Time on HBO. 1-800-222-5222. I'm Larry Elder. My guest is Robert Zimmerman. Robert Zimmerman is the brother of George Zimmerman. Rod is in Yorba Linda. Rod, you're on with Robert Zimmerman and Larry. Go ahead, Rod.
Hi, good afternoon, fellas.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Robert, my question is, was there any follow-up with regards to a civil lawsuit? I know there wasn't any criminal charges filed with regards to Spike Lee and the way he tried to tweet out the home address for your parents.
Right. My understanding of that case is that it involved the McLean family, an elderly couple that lived in the area, that someone had a name similar to George's. Now, I believe what happened there is that for an undisclosed amount, the McLean family and Spike Lee settled. As for action that my family will take civilly against one or more parties ever, now or in the future, that's going to be for our father to announce, and he's the person who oversees that sort of aspect of our new way of life, the legal aspect of it.
I understand that you may have filed a lawsuit or thinking about filing a lawsuit against NBC for taking out the dispatcher asking the race of the individual that your brother was following?
To say the least, that's what happened. But yes, gzvnbc.com is the website for that lawsuit. And the lawsuit alleges that, among other things in there, that it was intentional, that it was done for ratings, that it wasn't done to somehow inform people better or for time, as NBC kind of...
And didn't somebody involved in that, the editor or somebody, get fired?
People got fired at the time. More recently, the president of NBC News, Steve Capus, stepped down, resigned presumably, and that was cited as one of the reasons, one of the things that had slipped by his attention, and that NBC had, I guess, decided to part ways with him.
Frank is in L.A. Frank, you're on with Robert Zimmerman and Larry. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, Robert, I'm kind of excited to be on the phone with Bob Dylan. A couple of things. One is. Your brother, I mean, wasn't he self-appointed as far as, him being the neighborhood watch?
Right, okay.
Watchman?
Yeah.
And the other thing is didn't they also catch him hiding money? I mean, you guys are painting him to be a saint, and it's like, didn't they catch him for, taking the contributions and putting it in his own little nest egg?
Right. The first question about the nature of that, that rhetorical line, self-appointed captain, what George said, and it is in evidence, and what George said in his interview, is that the idea to originate an actual real police-sanctioned neighborhood watch was his because of an experience that his wife had relating to a home being invaded.
Robert, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
I've never quite understood why it's a bad thing that somebody has, quote, self-appointed himself to be a neighborhood watch person or a neighborhood captain or neighborhood whatever. When did that become a bad thing that you're proactively making sure that your neighborhood is safe?
When is
that something you're supposed to apologize for?
Right. I don't think it's necessarily a bad
it.
thing. I think it aids the media in kind of their directive of painting. They have to make a monster. The facts of the case will never change. What happened, happened. But if they can change kind of how people perceive George, then
so it's better that he be recruited as a neighborhood watch captain, that he was lying in his bed and somebody knocked on the door and said, "Hey, George, here's a job for you." That would be better.
I don't know what's
if he volunteered. I'm trying to understand Frank's point.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's that he's been misinformed, and the reality is that the people who came, and there were a couple dozen who came to this organizational meeting for the Neighborhood Watch, they elected him. He was, in fact, an elected, not self-appointed Neighborhood Watch captain, if you want to call it
Even
that.
if he were self-appointed.
Right.
Even if there was no election. Somebody stood up and did the job.
Right.
There were burglaries, there were break-ins in this area. There was concern about crime. Your brother stepped up. He was proactive, and now all of a sudden that's a bad thing. I'm just trying to figure out why.
Well, sure, and actually the reality of the situation again is he was not engaged in any kind of neighborhood watch activity, and that's where we get to this whole self-appointed thing and the watch captain and the cowboy and the vigilante and the racist. You know, he was just a guy going to the store. A lot of people don't understand the concept, because they don't have concealed weapon permits, of people are just armed. It's kind of like when you have your iPhone, you have your gun, and you don't brandish it, you don't show it, you don't expose it in public, you're not allowed to. In some cases it could be a felony depending on what you're doing. So George was a guy who was armed lawfully. He went to the store, and that had nothing to do with the Neighborhood Watch. It was very convenient for the media to throw that tagline in. George was many things other than an elected Neighborhood Watch captain. He was a college graduate. He walked with his class. He was handed a diploma. He unfortunately missed the last few credits he needed to graduate because he was not able to finish school because of security concerns. But he was a lot of things besides a Neighborhood Watch captain.
Robert Zimmerman is my guest. The number is 1-800-222-5222. Big Money Griff is in Los Angeles. Big Money, I am so disappointed that you have not called in, what has it been, years, Big Money.
Well,
you know what? I would accuse you of being racist, but I think I know a little better. I'm trying to figure out, Big Money. I've been back on the air now for 3-4 years. This is the first time I've heard from you in 3 or 4 years. I'm disappointed, Big Money.
All right. Well, I'll try to do better as the months come and go in the years to come.
Now, Robert, Big Money calls himself Big Money Griff. I refer to him as Small Change Griff. So,
okay.
So we have a bit of some issues. But Big Money, go ahead.
Okay, Robert. You know, we the people that are in the black community want to know how come
Big Money thinks he speaks for all black people. You see, he's got that issue.
We did not see any blood on
you know how your brother got unanimously elected to be watch captain. Big Money Griff has been unanimously elected to be the spokesperson for the black community. Just understand that. Okay.
Thank you.
Big Money, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And there's so much more about that needs to be said. But at the same time, we have a problem with the fact that we did not see any blood on the back of your brother's head when he was being arrested. And
okay, let's deal with that one.
Right.
Was there blood on the back of your brother's head?
Obviously there was. I mean, that picture's come out. The picture of him in the back of the police car, beaten up, nose bleeding all over the place, that's come out. And then it's, when the people do see it, they say, well, it's just Photoshopped. That's not real. Mm-hmm. And then when it's not Photoshopped, it's not real. It's just that the police are in a conspiracy. They made it up, you know. So some people will never be satisfied no matter how many pictures you show of what actually happened.
Big Money, I didn't intend for you to hang up. You hung up. I was simply cutting you off so that Robert could answer your question. But please feel free to call back if you like. But, Robert, to give you some idea of Big Money's mentality, if I'm not mistaken, this is a guy who not only felt that O.J. Simpson was somebody who was going to be found not guilty, he felt that he was completely, totally innocent, that O.J. Simpson didn't murder 2 people. So anybody, in my opinion, who believes O.J. Simpson had nothing at all to do with murdering 2 people has disqualified themselves from operating heavy machinery, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
David is in L.A. David, you're on with Robert Zimmerman and Larry. Go ahead, David.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
The one regardless of whether or not George is good or bad or Tim's good or bad, no one knows what happened in those few minutes of the encounter between the 2 men.
Except those 2. And one of them is
Nobody
dead.
really knows what happened in those 2 or 3 minutes. No one really knows. And, of course, Trayvon's not a saint, but the fact of the matter is, that's what's going to get down to. I mean, did George tell you what happened in those couple of minutes that really happened?
Yes, George told his whole family what really happened. And in addition to us, which we're not important, we're not the entire legal system, George waived his right to remain silent, spoke very candidly to the police about exactly what had happened, passed a voice stress analysis, went back the next day to the scene to do his best to kind of his best attempt at recreating what had happened, kind of walking the police through. And I think that when people have something to hide about their actions, you see another chain of events go down where people hide a weapon, they run away, they don't cooperate with police, they lawyer up. The reason George did that, in my mind, it would be the same reason that I would. Police are not supposed to pick sides. Neither are laws. Neither is the justice system. You don't pick a side and say, well, if this person's dead, we're on their side, and we're going to do everything we can to bring justice to their killer. What the reality is if there's a justified use of force, and that force is lethal, and that's how that person ended up dead, the law is pretty clear about that. There's not a lot of wiggle room as to what happened, and the law is you have to find evidence to contradict that. Unfortunately, the other witness to what happened, Trayvon Martin, died, and he can't speak for it. And there are other witnesses. I'm not going to get into exactly what this witness said that witness said the other, but George did say himself that a man came out, screamed at them, "I'm calling 911." That was not even enough to dissuade his attacker. Not even that person coming out and saying, "I'm calling the police," restrained him in any way, shape, or form. He continued to rain down the blows, and we don't have any reason to disbelieve George. I mean, that approach he took to being very open and candid with the police, I think, speaks volumes about his credibility. He didn't have anything to hide because he really did believe that the law doesn't pick sides.
The number is 1-800-222-5222. Robert, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to ask you this. I'm a lawyer. I was a trial lawyer. And I did some criminal law, too. I worked for the DA's office one summer. And the sort of rule of thumb is if you're a criminal defense attorney, you don't put your client on unless your client is telling the truth, unless your client is innocent. Right. It would not surprise me if this is one of the rare times when the defendant actually takes a stand. It would not surprise me if your brother, assuming this thing ultimately gets to trial and goes all the way, it would not surprise me if your brother takes a stand. I want to talk to you about that in a second.
Okay.
1-800-222-5222. And Tim in L.A. says when people say self-appointed, he wants to tell us what that really means. I'm Larry Elder. My in-studio guest is Robert Zimmerman, the brother of George Zimmerman. He's agreed to stay up for another few more minutes. I appreciate it, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Joanne is in L.A. Joanne, you're on with Robert Zimmerman and Larry. Go ahead, Joanne.
Hi there. I have a question, well, a comment, actually. Sometimes people, the initial aggression is not necessarily a physical aggression, but it could be the presence of someone who is appearing to do harm to you or wants to do harm to you. And in my opinion, if Trayvon felt that his life was in danger, that the aggressor was in fact, the kid's name, I'm drawing a blank.
George.
Was it George? If Trayvon thought the fact that George was not turning around and walking back, but walking in pursuit of him or following him, I would say that the initial aggressor was George Zimmerman, and that all of this could have been avoided had George stopped. He was the adult in the situation. He's dealing with a kid who does a kid. So the kid feels intimidated and probably felt, I better take the first blow, otherwise I'm going to die.
Let me, if I can I interrupt right there just to ask one question, because I seem to keep getting these questions about followed and caught up to. Have you actually ever watched, and it's on YouTube, it's all over the web, the reenactment George did with police the next day, or have you heard the original unedited non-emergency phone call that George made to police? Have you ever?
I have.
Do you recall in there where he says he lost sight of Mr. Martin? And that would imply that they're, presumably not within eyesight of one another. And again, I said, I don't know if Trayvon laid in wait. I don't know if he returned back. I don't know what happened. But what I do know is that my brother lost sight of him. If you lose sight of something, you cannot encounter it. You can't follow into what would lead into a confrontation. And I think that you're making some valid points that other people have made. There's a criminal element here that's really the question is, and it is, was this a murder? It's not, is George the sharpest tool in the shed? Did George make every decision right? Could the dispatcher have said something differently? Could they not? You know, if you hear that call, there is some prompting by the dispatcher to disclose exactly where this person was going to. And,
the thing is that George did not follow what the dispatcher was saying. And again, your brother was the adult in the situation. He was the one who placed the call. He was the one who seemed to be questioning the presence of Trayvon and started in pursuit.
Right.
Now, how he lost sight of Trayvon is maybe something to be questioned. Did your brother stop in his tracks, or when he lost sight, did he continue to look for Trayvon?
You know, all those questions that you're asking.
Trayvon.
With respect, if I can just cut in, because you're really asking like 4 or 5 questions at a time. Those questions that you're asking are very clearly answered in the report, in not only the call, but the report he does the next day. Where did he go and why? If you hear the phone call, the dispatcher says, you know, there's some kind of question as to exactly what is the address. Where did you last see him? If a dispatcher asks me, what is the address of the last place you saw someone? I go to find the address. I go to look for a street sign. There wasn't one there. But that answers, you know, that question of, did he stop in his tracks? Was he told to stop in his tracks? Was he told, now march backwards directly back to your car and stay in your car and lock the doors until police get there? I don't think that's the case. You again said, you know, disobeyed instructions. Now, the police chief has come out and said those are not legal instructions. Those are not police orders.
It wasn't even an order. What the dispatcher said was something like, we don't need you to do that.
Right.
Which is not even an order.
Which is not even an order. And it's my understanding that suggestions like that, under no legal context, are they in fact orders when you're just on the phone with the dispatcher, because they're not where you are. Mm-hmm. They could tell you stay in the car and someone walks up to the car and shoots you. Now whose fault is what happened, you know, but that is just a myth. It's unfortunate you keep relying on that mythology to color your perspective of what actually happened. But George obeyed every instruction. He was told, we don't need you to do that. And he said, okay. And if you really continued, if you really listened to the call as you said you did, and you continue down further on the call, he's asked what the last address is that he saw Trayvon Martin in. And that's what George was doing, was going to get some kind of address because he didn't know the street. And unfortunately, Mr. Martin had other plans for George that evening.
Robert, let's grab one more. Tim is in L.A. Tim, you're on with Robert Zimmerman and Larry. Go ahead, Tim.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Afternoon.
Yeah, I think when people, though you cleared it up and you said that he was appointed neighborhood watch, but I think the concern is when people say self-appointed, is this person, properly trained? I mean, he's a 26-year-old. Does he have the proper maturity? You know what I mean? To be walking around a neighborhood with a gun. I mean, he's not a cop. Police go through extensive training. So I think when people say that, it's more of, a concern. And even if he is appointed, that concern still is present. And from what I understand, after the call, Trayvon was actually talking on the phone with his girlfriend, and he stated to her that this guy is following her. So I'll just take the response off the air. And I just wanted to say, Larry, you should allow people to finish their statement before you cut them off. Don't assume that they're calling in to say something negative. You hung up on me earlier in the week, and I just wish you gave me an opportunity to finish my statement. Thank you very much, guys.
Tim, did I just give you an opportunity to finish your statement? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, again, the aspect of self-appointment, I hear what he's saying. I understand that. Unfortunately, the premise is flawed because it relies, again, entirely on this notion. And it's not his fault he thinks this because the media sold this to him. It relies entirely on this notion that George was walking around the neighborhood with a gun on neighborhood watch. And with that knowledge, engaged, encountered, confronted, whatever you want to call it, somebody who was not an adult, which George wouldn't have any way of knowing anyway, right? I mean, unless he ID'd this person. But the premise is flawed. George was going to the grocery store, called someone who was suspicious, and was prompted to describe precisely where is this person running off to. Now, we're in 90210. zip code right now. We're not in Sanford, Florida. We're not in that community. If you've never even looked at a map, don't understand there's different entrances, gates, the roads, different places that people can disappear to, educate yourself. You know, it kind of comes to light when you take all this mythology away. What you're left with is this bare bones example of an unfortunate situation where someone threatened to take someone's gun, and that kind of roll of the dice unfortunately got him killed. And it's tragic either way. George's lawyer used the analogy of a 17-year-old driving down the highway at 90 miles an hour and, you know, runs into a telephone pole, for example. It is death by his hand if he dies, but you don't go and arrest the telephone pole. You know, it's just unfortunate that it happened. That our position has always been that George did not commit murder. There was an unfortunate series of events that led to this encounter and led to its outcome, but it isn't called murder.
Finally, I mentioned that, generally speaking, a criminal defendant does not take the stand. Do you think your brother will?
I suspect very strongly that he will. I think
so, too. This is one of the rare times when I suspect maybe he will.
Right, and I think in a sense that's kind of an interesting question, because I think he has so many times already taken the stand, as it were. You know, when we wonder about is someone going to take the stand or not, it's because they've made all these, you know, deceptive statements in the past, or they lied to cops, or they can't get their story straight, or there's conflicting reports. He was very forthcoming, as forthright as he could be from the beginning with the police, and has cooperated every day that the police requested his cooperation in any way. So in essence, you know, I think he's going to take the stand and repeat a lot of the same things that he said before.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for coming in. And again, unless there's something that I don't know, something that comes out that I don't know, based on what I've seen, I'm amazed they even brought charges in the first place. And I don't believe he'll ever be convicted. I believe he'll be found not guilty. And this strikes me as one of the rare instances where I think the criminal defendant will take the stand. And if so, if your brother testifies anywhere like the way you are, he'll be just fine.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, George is just as articulate, if not more, actually.
All right, Robert, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you like what you just heard in this brief highlight of the Larry Elder Show, make sure to become a genuine, bona fide Eldorado. That way you can have unrestricted access to every show, every day, commercial-free, on-demand, not to mention all the other exclusive content that we create just for you.